Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and welcome to this first meeting of the LPSA Gender Equity and Women's Empowerment Working Group. We are really excited to see you. Today's topic will be focused on how local governments can effectively tackle gender-based violence. And I'm really looking forward to an enriching discussion because we have an amazing array of speakers today. And of course, your presence today reflects a shared commitment to advancing gender equity and strengthening local governance in the fight against gender-based violence. And that is irrespective of whether you are a government official, policy practitioner, civil society representative, researchers, advocates, scholars. Your insights today really are going to enrich the conversation and are really invaluable to this conversation. This discussion is brought to you by the LPSA Thematic Working Group on gender equity and women's empowerment, for which I have the privilege of serving as a coordinator and a co-chair. Our goal is to elevate the debate and catalyze action on the role of multi-level governance and subnational governance in advancing gender equity and inclusive governance, and advancing gender equity and inclusive governance, as well as women's empowerment. Today's discussion is part of a series of events that we've been hosting throughout this year. This is the first one for this year, but in previous years, in previous months, we've had conversations around women in local politics. We have had discussions about gender responsive services and elevating the debate on this topic. So this year we will be looking at today's topic. And in August, we will be looking at gender responsive subnational finance. In November, we will be looking at advancing women's careers in local government administration. Moving on to what we're going to be looking at today, in the first part of this session, we will look at examples of how local governments are taking the lead in tackling GBV. And towards the end, we will have a panel discussion on collaborative approaches that amplify local government efforts. So before we begin, and you can already tell we had some challenges in the beginning, I will allow me to mention a few housekeeping reminders. Please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking. And we really encourage you to share your thoughts, your questions, your comments in the chat throughout the session, and also interact with other members of the working group. If you have questions specifically for our speakers, please drop them in the chat. Paddy will be collecting them and we'll put them together and share them with our speakers as we go along and towards the end during the Q&A. We are really fortunate to have an exceptional panel today, representing diverse perspectives from academia, local government, and civil society. And to start us off, we have Dr. Michelle Maziwisa, who is a program manager at the University of Pretoria. She will share insights on how local governments are tackling GBV, particularly in Africa, but she will also give us a little bit of an introduction on GBV and the nexus with decentralization. Dr. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for the warm introduction, and a very good afternoon to everyone who's joining us. It's really such a privilege to be part of this important conversation, which unfortunately has for decades left a really harsh mark across our continent. I just want to put up my slides, and hopefully this time around I get it right. It should be showing, let's see. Jackie, can you please just confirm that you can see the slides moving?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to be speaking a little bit about cities and their role in relation to gender-based violence. I thought it might be worthwhile to start by defining GBV and identifying some of the context in which it occurs, and just briefly touching on the decentralization of government, and then go a little bit into more detail on what cities are doing and what they can do a little bit better. So because this is such a wide topic with many intersections, it's not going to be possible to cover every single thing, but I will try to touch on issues, and hopefully that will facilitate engagement on the issue. My understanding is that the participants are more than welcome to put in their comments in the chat box as we're going along, and we'll try to address those comments as they come. So the first question really is, what is gender-based violence? I'm in a room full of experts and practitioners, so I think you all have an idea. The CEDAW committee, that's the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, defines GBV as a form of discrimination that seriously inhibits women's ability to enjoy rights and freedoms on the basis of equality with men. So this is really just the underpinning of that differentiation between the genders. And we understand now that gender-based violence does not only occur between men and women, but also across different genders. And I'll go into that in a little bit. Some of the additional human rights violations, apart from discrimination, that can be associated with GBV would include human dignity, the right to equality, freedom from violence, and this may be perpetrated by individuals acting in their private capacity or even public officials. An example here is when there are elections and there's associated violence that targets women in those contexts. There also, in some instances, it can even affect the right to life. We're aware of the high incidence of femicide across the continent. Why does gender-based violence occur? There are really a myriad of reasons. Here are just a few that I thought I could flag: issues around especially structural inequalities. In our context, and I'm focusing here on Africa and I'm focusing on women, although I'll touch on the other genders briefly, but just to set the context. The structural inequalities that we experience in this region contribute significantly to the incidence of gender-based violence. There are issues around unequal access to education and unequal access to jobs, wage inequality, unequal access to resources, land tenure, and so forth, which all contribute to women's agency being lost or being reduced significantly and tend to create a situation of dependence, especially financial dependence, and that can contribute to women staying in abusive relationships. There's also an issue of misogyny and toxic masculinity, where aggression and dominance and control seem to be advanced not only by individuals in community, but sometimes even people in leadership positions, people who are traditional leaders or religious leaders, and sometimes even professionals and the media all advance, it's not all, but sometimes advance toxic masculinity. And then another one important for the region is the incidence of forced and child marriages, where families are experiencing or living in poverty and decide to marry off their children in order to get resources that can support the family. So there are many different examples, but these are just a few of them. And in as much as my discussion is focusing on cities, it's important to understand that cities are not configured in the same way. In many countries, cities are urban centers, but that's not always the case. In South Africa, for example, and I'll refer a lot to South Africa, we have cities that have a wide spectrum of areas, right? So we have the very urban areas, we have the informal areas that are underdeveloped, and we also have some peri-urban or semi-rural areas that constitute part of the larger metro cities. So that's just to keep in mind that there are dimensions which are not specific to urban areas. And then also important to note is the differences between intimate partner violence, which is between romantic partners, whether it's in the home or not, domestic violence, which is between people living in the same household, despite the nature of the relationship, and then gender-based violence sort of encapsulates both of those. In the context of cities, I think it will be interesting to discuss and hear also from the other panelists that cities tend to have a more important role that they can play within the public spaces, right? In relation to mobility, public transportation, your public parks, toilets, streets, private spaces, public spaces in general. But That's not to exclude cities from a role that they can play within private spaces. So I think that's also an important part of the conversation, to see how do we get cities within the home, if that makes sense. So yeah. And then the forms of gender-based violence, these are not new to anyone. We have the traditional forms, physical violence, sexual violence, and then there are also sort of more recent types of gender-based violence, like those that are online, those that are digitally facilitated. And I thought it's worthwhile to note the African Union Child Online Safety and Empowerment Policy, which is trying to address these digitally facilitated violations. So the range of GBV goes from just comments, for example, unwanted comments, unwanted touching, and it goes all the way to femicide, which is then killing by one's romantic partner. And GBV is not only limited to violence against women and girls, but also we see increasingly attacks on sexual minorities, and there's this misconception of corrective rape. So there is that violence, and there's also violence against men by women. And there should be, I think, a specific focus on communities that experience particular intersections of vulnerabilities, like your migrant communities, undocumented persons, children, women, people with disabilities, the elderly, the LGBTIQ community, and so forth. All right. So at this point, I'd like to propose, if you could join me, please, for just a moment of silence, to recognize not only the women that have lost their lives, but also the women who have lost their identity, their dignity, their hopes, their dreams, their futures because of gender-based violence. Rebecca Cheptegei, set on fire by her ex-partner, 2024. Damaris, strangled to death in her boyfriend's home. Agnes, stabbed to death by her husband. Tshegofatso Pule, stabbed and left hanging on a tree by her boyfriend. So many examples of women, and this is just a fraction, just a drop in the ocean of the number of women whose lives have been taken unnecessarily because of gender-based violence. What do the statistics say about this? Globally, every 10 minutes, a woman is intentionally killed by her partner or family. Between 39 and 47% of Kenyan women have experienced gender-based violence in their lifetime. 50% of women in abusive relationships report being subjected to some form of financial control or economic violence. And even when matters are reported to the relevant authorities, it seems like very few actually end up getting convicted. This example from the South African Commission on Gender Equality notes that only 50% of cases result in arrests, but only 4.1% of those cases that are reported result in convictions. That's a very big gap, and that excludes all the cases that are not actually reported. So where does this leave us? Is this just something that's the responsibility of the National Police Services? Unfortunately, for South Africa, the country where I live, femicide is five times higher than the global average. And South Africa has the fourth highest female interpersonal violence death rate out of 183 countries listed by the World Health Organization. So you can see here that a lot of the GBV that is resulting in death is actually being perpetrated through intimate partner violence and within the home. These are spaces that seem far out of the reach of cities. Another important thing to note here, the cost of responding to GBV is between 28 billion and 42 billion every year, which is almost 1.3% of our GDP. So this is a huge financial cost. An example that the authors here provide is that this is the same amount that would be used to cover the salaries of 200,000 primary school teachers. This is a big cost for any sphere of government. This is massive. In South Africa, the provincial government is responsible for education, in terms of the salaries. This is a big cut out of the resources, the small amount of resources that are available to our provincial governments. Unfortunately, we're not alone in this. It's not just an African challenge, but even across the region, and I think you'll hear from one of the other speakers, the statistics show that even in Europe, where we expect, I think a lot of us expect that there's less of an incidence of gender-based violence in the EU, but about a third of women have experienced physical or sexual abuse at least once in their lives. So bringing it back to the region, Article 4 of the Maputo Protocol specifies, certain provisions that our governments are responsible for. And one of those is to enact laws that prohibit all forms of violence, but also to adopt legislative, administrative, social, and economic measures that may, as necessary, to prevent, punish, and eradicate all forms of violence against women. And we know that cities are not direct actors within the international framework because they're not states per se. But we also understand that cities are an arm of the government, which also carry a responsibility to help the national government fulfill its international obligations. So much as we know, African countries have different forms of government. Some have, pardon the noise outside, some have federal systems like Nigeria, some have quasi-federal systems like South Africa, which is a unitary state with federal elements. Some have devolution like Kenya and Zimbabwe, and some are just purely unitary. So the kind of approach that local governments will take will depend on the nature, or rather the system of government that exists, right? It's going to be determined by the level of autonomy that the local government has. It's going to depend on the revenue raising capacity that the local government has, and its ability to determine both the policy and actually the implementation of the policy within its area of governance. So fortunately for South Africa, the local government mandate is specific. So there's specific functional areas where the local government has capacity to act without necessarily seeking authorization from the provincial or the national government. So in terms of, for those cities that have the autonomy, that have the revenue raising capacity, that have the decision-making capacity and policy-making capacity, what can those cities do in order to respond to GBV? GBV cannot be solely a national responsibility because, according to the principle of subsidiarity, the level of government that is closest to the people is actually the cities, and they're the best place to respond to issues because normally they're even the first responders, and whenever there are protests, they're also the first targeted, in response to the same issues such as GBV. So there are three areas that I would touch on. One is prevention, the second one is education, and the third one is responses. So in terms of prevention, cities or local governments can establish within their policy frameworks specific provisions that speak to gender-based violence. They can also cooperate with NGOs, other spheres of government, and the private sector, especially because we know a lot of our cities have resource limitations. So it's important to partner with organizations that have the capacity to support or to implement some of the aspects of work that cities don't have the capacity to. There's also the need for gender-sensitive approaches to both, to not only communication, but also to city planning and budgeting. And these gender-sensitive approaches should be supported by gender inclusion. So for legitimacy of these processes, it's important that women also constitute part of the committees and the boards and the councils that are making decisions on city planning and budgeting. Okay. I've mentioned already city planning, the importance of urban design and making that conducive to protection from gender-based violence. I think one of the things I can touch on here is transportation. because it's one of the biggest challenges when it comes to gender-based violence within the public space. I know that if you look at the city of Cape Town, for example, or even the province of the Western Cape, one of the biggest challenges has been that they are trains, but they're not the responsibility of the municipality of the city. They're the responsibility of the province. But the people that use the trains are moving within the city. And when the trains are not working or they're not reliable, they create pockets of risk, especially when these are early morning trains or late night trains. And this is even more problematic because of the legacy of apartheid in South Africa, where communities were separated, and particularly Black and colored lower income communities are still living in the areas that were segregated during apartheid. So there's really this large distance between where people live and where they work. So this affects how women commute between home and work, especially when they have to commute in early hours when it's still dark or late at night. This is compounded, of course, by not having street lighting, by not having panic buttons, and also just by virtue of living in an area which is an informal space that has no real public infrastructure. There are issues also around the use of common public toilets that are constructed to support the informal community. But these are so far from where the home is. It is dark. There's just so many opportunities for violations to take place. And these are things that a city or municipality can be able to address if it takes an intentional approach. There are also opportunities for education and monitoring, just being careful of the messaging and the stereotypes that are used within a particular city, right? There's a need for targeted messaging that speaks to both survivors in terms of resources that are available to them, in terms of support that is available to them, but also to perpetrators in terms of interventions and how they can be assisted to transition from that space of violence into a space of living peacefully with the rest of the community and with their partners. And then in terms of the response, sorry, just finding my place. All right, in terms of the response, I think the two most important things that I want to flag are the importance of information that is accurate, that is complete, and that is delivered in a way that is dignified and private. I want to give an example. In some countries, maybe I shouldn't give names, but in some countries, when someone goes to report that they've been sexually assaulted or raped, it's not unusual for them to be asked to take a seat. And 10 minutes later, someone comes to attend to them and just yells from across the hallway, those that came with the rape case, like, can you come this side? And it really, undermines their dignity in so many ways, because there's no exercise of discretion. So it's important to have, a dignified response, but also comprehensive supportive programs and a coordinated response across the spheres of government. Okay, so what have we seen as an example from the city of Cape Town?
2 minutes.
Thanks. Sorry, there's so much to say, but yeah, we'll continue with the discussions later. So from the city of Cape Town, some of the examples that I've seen in terms of prevention, I think the important one to note is the Strengthening Families program, which is very proactive and brings together communities and family members to take an 8-week course where they have workshops on communication, conflict resolution, domestic violence, and so forth. And then they also create these opportunities for families to take part in activities and their recreational areas. There are also job opportunities that are extended, targeting women within the public works program. And in terms of education, there are the usual days of activism, which I think are not really effective, but I suppose to keep the message going. And then, interestingly, the city website and Facebook provide information that is very clear on how to report on abuses, and also on how to contact safe houses for women that are leaving abusive environments. And then in terms of the response, the website also provides contact details for the Metro Police, for the South African Police Services, information for women's shelters, and downloadable fact sheets or info on what GBV actually is and how to report on it. And there's also a dedicated public emergency center that responds as a call center and also provides additional support to people who have reports. And in terms of collaboration, I guess two main activities within the city. One is Women for Change program, which provides a sort of life skills training and support for domestic violence and wellness. And then in addition, there's also a targeted program for men, which looks at men and masculinity, which, discourages violence and supports, building good models for fatherhood and just parenting. So finally, I think we can probably all say, at least if you're in Africa, I know most of you will agree with me when I say we have a lot of the frameworks. We have the systems, we have the laws, we have, gender responsive police units on paper, but that has not stopped GBV from occurring. And some of the reasons for this are the practical issues that people do not report. A lot of people don't report because they're afraid or ashamed or they're dependent. When they report, they don't get assistance on time. Or, like we experienced during the COVID period, a lot of people reported but had to go back to the same house with the same perpetrator, having reported them and, exposed again to the same risk. The solutions are very West-centric, if I can put it that way. Do they address issues of, the cultural context? Do they look at redress and compensation for the victim? And then what about the intergovernmental relations? Who is responsible for what? If the city of Cape Town has a problem with safety on railway transportation, can it do anything when that's not its functional area of competence? How do the two, provincial and local government, find areas of intersection to resolve this issue so that there can be a coordinated response? And then what about resources? What about buy-in? In Rio de Janeiro, they've introduced pink transport, which is where public transportation has carriages specifically for women only. Is this something that can be, transplanted? Will there be buy-in from the local community? Is it even possible to implement? Do we have roads in these areas where we want? So all of those things have to be taken into account. What about the digital divide? The city of Cape Town has a fantastic website with lots of information, but a lot of people cannot access the digital devices, cannot pay for the data, maybe don't even understand how to use the device or to know which applications. So there's also that gap. Is there any potential for partnering with private actors for zero-rated data? What about the rural-urban divide? What about who is actually in the room to make decisions about urban planning? What percentage of our municipal councillors are women? Are they protected when they run for office? Are they supported through adequate financing? Are they actually equipped?
Yeah.
And does the electoral system enable their participation? Yeah. So these are some of the things, and I want to leave you with that as we continue the conversation. For your own country, what are the issues that you think need to be addressed, and how have some of your countries have resolved the issues? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Michelle. Very heavy questions. I hope our participants in the meeting can also try and respond to that. How do we address some of these key questions, issues of decentralization and issues of resources, issues of gender responsive public services? In fact, I want to pick up on that, on gender responsive public services. You've given a very good example of transportation, and turning now to Mio Drak, colleague, who is project manager at NALAS, he's going to be sharing his expertise on how can local governments ensure that public services address women's safety needs, because we recognize that gender responsive services are essential in the fight against violence against women, because they not only ensure safe access to vital services, but they also support economic and social rights. In services such as infrastructure, water, electricity, transportation, as you mentioned, really contribute to can contribute to addressing GBV, and providing such services can contribute to addressing issues of violence against women. So I want to hand over to Miodrag to share his comments.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for the invitation to discuss and present on this very important topic. I will try to share my presentation now. Okay, it's okay. Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for the invitation and opportunity to present NALA's activities for increasing awareness and building the capacities of local governments in providing gender-responsive public services to the citizens. I come from NALAS. NALAS stands for the Network of Association of Local Authorities in Southeast Europe. We are celebrating 20 years active involvement and contribution in development of the local governments in Southeast Europe. The network brings together 13 full-member local government associations from Southeast Europe, from 12 economies from this region. One of our key focuses of our activities is to provide capacity development measures for strengthening the capacities of local governments to deliver better services to their citizens. In our portfolio of activities, we have implemented a number of interventions in the region supporting the improvement of the waste management services. And following of that experience, we have developed one methodology for identification of the gender aspects for solid waste management service delivery. As one of the core services provided by the local government, it is of special interest of public, and sometimes often it's perceived as a gender neutral service. So through this methodology, we have tried to identify the specifics of the gender aspects of the solid waste management services, and to tailor and make them accessible for all citizens, men and women. When we have applied this methodology, we have assessed the cycle of and the functions of the waste management that is in the direct communication with the customers. So the gender perspectives have been assessed from the part where the citizens are interacting with the system. The other part where we have transportation, recycle, disposal, the part that is done within the public utility was not assessed with this methodology. This methodology was successfully tested in city of Bijeljina, Bosnia and Herzegovina, where with support from the local government, the city of Bijeljina, and also the public utility, we have tested this methodology with involvement of the citizens, with service with the citizens, and focus group, especially having a focus groups where the women were presented in order to assess the specific needs of the women regarding this service of the municipality. So we have assessed the perception of the men and women in waste management, the roles, needs, expectation, and we found that there is a big difference in some of the aspects, and we can say that
Mio, you have muted yourself. Please
See,
unmute yourself.
I am moving the presentation. Women are primarily responsible for shopping, then also for buying the products with less packaging. They are more interesting for recycling. They separate the waste at home, but also they are finding that the some of the equipment is not easy for use. They are all broken or it is unclean. And also very important, they found that the places for waste collection are not safe due to lack of light or unsafe area or passing through the dark alleys to come to these places. Having all this information about the specifics, the public, let me see how to move, the public utility and the municipality have developed a model, engendered model for the waste management. They prepared the plan and technical documentation how one ideal, I would say, waste collection should look like. And here we can see that they have also taken into account the separation, the recycling, but also very important, making this place much more safe by providing the street lights lightening the place. In this case, due to the lack of electric distribution possibility, they applied the solar panels for electrification lightening of this place. Also, the public utility and municipality, they did a promotion of this model, but also education of the citizens how to use this new waste boxes. So this also includes response to the request of the citizens to have much easier access to the services by adding the foot pedal use for the containers that can be easier used by women, children, or elderly. Another model that we are also, and another program that we have also implementing is Leave No One Behind social mapping. When we are using the methodology to assess the specific needs of the citizens in regards to the municipal services by respecting this very important Leave No One Behind principle of the 2030 agenda and local application of the global sustainable development fund developing goals by having participatory decision making, asking the citizens what are their needs in order to prevent, first of all, discrimination, and also to improve the feeling of safe and then comfortable and I would say to be and to have been respected when using the public services provided by the local governments. We have also e-learning course on this topic as part of the NALA-C Academy, where we provide a number of e-learning trainings for the local governments and municipalities in Southeast Europe. And there is also a link to the NALA's application, Inclusive Social Approaches, Good Practices of Southeast Europe Municipality, on the link provided here. So all interested can check these informations. Regarding the gender equality, we are doing a regular research and collection of data about the representation of the women mayor in our region. And women mayors, especially the number of women mayors is very low, around 8%. And also the women mayor councillors, the number is a bit bigger, but it is due to the legal provisions and mandatory number of the women in the candidate list. But having the municipal services and public utility services, we can also see that the gender structure is much more in the favor of men, which is very important to have in mind when we want to make these services to be more gender responsive. Also, having the
Maybe you can
gender-based.
wrap up. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes. I am finishing with this slide. So also on our website there is available compendium of gender responsive budgeting, where we also have several examples about how the local governments in this region are addressing gender-based violence. We have examples from North Macedonia, Montenegro, Slovenia, and Albania. For example, from North Macedonia, there is a presentation of the Shell Center for women victims of violence. And also, when it's come to the women mayors, we have established a forum of women mayors that is active for almost 5 years, where we are empowering the women mayors in this region to address the issue of gender equality, gender responsive budgeting in the region. So on the following links, you can find more information about that. Thank you very much for your attention. I am available for any questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Drag. I think that's an excellent presentation. Thank you for also sharing your materials and tools that people can use, that we can use on issues of gender responsive public service provision. And I just want to pick up on your last point on the issues of having mayors and women in political positions and women in decision-making spaces, because most importantly is having women in those policy-making spaces, those budgeting processes and planning. And for us to do that, we also need to have women within the political leadership of the local governments, but also within the local government administration. But we continue to see women continue to be underrepresented, as you mentioned, in political leadership, with over 60% of the women avoiding politics due to the fear of violence. And with us, we have one of these main issues of violence is digital violence. And we have Annalise Cousins and Councillor Flo Klukas, who will explore the issue of addressing GBV and digital violence in women's political participation. Welcome, Annalise.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for having me today, and also for giving me the opportunity to speak with such a great audience as well, with amazing speakers that have already laid the foundation for our important discussion today. I'm just going to jump straight into it, if my slide will allow. There we go. So I know that Michelle has already set the foundation in terms of definitions, and I'm just going to pick on a little bit of what was already mentioned. Gender-based violence is a pervasive global issue that undermines democratic principles and gender equality. As we all know, violence against women in politics is a specific form of gender-based violence that targets women primarily for being women. Women face various forms of violence, including physical, sexual, psychological, and economic harm. Social media and new technologies have led to an increase in the threat of violence against women. The digital realm has intensified these challenges and has created an additional barrier for women to become politically visible and engaged, with online platforms basically becoming arenas for gender-based attacks. At the Council of European Municipalities and Regions, we had the opportunity to publish our latest study, Women in Politics, Local and European Trends, where we focused on the representation across Europe at subnational level of women politicians, and gave an important focus on the violence women experience in politics, which included a spotlight on cyber violence, which continues to block and discourage women from entering and staying in politics. Now, as I've mentioned, we've had the opportunity to present this study, and I just want to highlight a few of the findings that we had in this study. So our findings show that 32% of respondents have experienced violence. Among the women who said that they suffered some form of violence during their political career, 29% have suffered cyber violence. And this kind of violence that they've experienced has negative consequences. 41% felt unsafe, 9% decided not to run for office again, and 21% became less vocal about political topics. These findings, for me, show one clear thing, that cyber violence is becoming an additional barrier to women's political participation from the moment they decide to run for office until they enter office, as well as during their political career, and in some cases, even afterwards. The last few years has shown that a strong and active digital presence is essential for modern political engagement. Women politicians rely on online platforms to campaign, communicate policies, and connect with constituents. However, without effective online safety policies, women are disproportionately targeted by cyber violence, hindering their political efficiency. Online abuse manifests in gender and sexualized attacks, aimed to disempower and silence women leaders. This hostile environment leads to self-censorship, reduces online engagement, and in some cases, as I mentioned, withdrawal from political life. Now, the landscape of digital violence is rapidly evolving, as was also mentioned by the first speaker, with emerging threats such as deepfakes, coordinated disinformation campaigns, and bot-driven harassment. These sophisticated attacks amplify the challenges women in general, but also in politics that they face online. Social media platforms have been criticized for inadequate responses to online abuse. Reports indicate that platforms such as Instagram and Facebook have failed to remove a significant proportion of abusive comments targeting female politicians, leaving harmful content accessible and perpetuating a culture of impunity and just continuing the vicious cycle of abuse. And in my personal view as well, legislation is struggling to keep up with the pace of the rapid evolving technologies, and is still grappling with understanding a global issue that has long existed in society, albeit in different forms. Now, what can local governments do? Local governments are pivotal in combating digital violence against women in politics. They can advocate for comprehensive online safety policies that hold tech companies accountable for preventing and addressing gender-based digital violence. They can invest in digital literacy and security training for politicians, especially women politicians, empowering them to navigate and counter online threats effectively. And here I would also like to add that it's important for male politicians to know how to address online violence to support their colleagues and other politicians. Implement legal frameworks that criminalize online gender-based violence, ensuring perpetrators face appropriate consequences, and foster networks of supporting among women leaders, facilitating the sharing of strategies and resources to combat online abuse collectively. Now, municipalities across Europe are actively addressing online gender-based violence. Specific legal frameworks at the municipal level that criminalize such acts are not widely documented. However, several European countries have implemented national laws that criminalize online gender-based violence, which municipalities enforce and support through local initiatives. In other words, at the municipal level, authorities work on implementing local policies and support services to combat online gender-based violence, operating within the framework of national law. While specific examples of municipalities enacting their own criminal laws against online gender-based violence or gender-based violence are limited, local governments play a crucial role in prevention, support, and enforcement in collaboration with national legislation. And I would like to share an initiative which was hard to choose because our members from all across Europe are working very hard on different initiatives. And it was hard to choose just one in the time that we have today. But the one that I would like to highlight was launched by the Brussels Capital Region's government, called Brussels Plan to Combat Violence Against Women, which has been coordinated by Equal Brussels. And it's a comprehensive plan that encompasses 56 concrete measures aimed at prevention, such as training and awareness raising, protection, such as improvement of the reporting system, also when you go to the police and so on. Set up alarm mechanisms through dispensing pharmacies, which means that if you go to a pharmacy, you are able to alert that you're dealing with gender-based violence, and they are trained then to support you and contact the right people, as well as support for victims and survivors, such as developing housing solutions, help and support, and creating help and support lines that are available to them. While the plan addresses various forms of violence, it also recognizes the growing concern of online violence against women. The plan drew on the expertise of civil societies through a broad consultation period, and the civil society was involved from before the implementation, during the implementation, and also afterwards, which I think is such an important factor to consider in this plan, because at times civil societies are not considered when it comes to the more local initiatives, and it's all about collaboration and working together to address this global issue. And the plan leverages all possible regional tools to ensure consistency with actions implemented at various governmental levels. As for those who might know, in Belgium, we have different levels of government, which means there are different factors to consider and different elements as well. But this plan has considered all of these ones, which I think is also something very important to highlight. Now, to conclude, cyber violence is a growing barrier to women's political participation, threatening both gender equality and democracy. And whilst municipalities may not independently establish legal frameworks to criminalize online gender-based violence, they are an integral in implementing and enforcing national and EU-level laws designed to combat such violence. Local governments play a crucial role in advocating for stronger policies, enhancing digital safety, and fostering support networks. While initiatives like the Brussels Plan show progress, more action is needed, and the time to act is now. And I thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that excellent presentation with very concrete examples. I want to move to Councillor Flor Klukas for a case study example of how local governments are tackling gender-based violence in the UK.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to be with you today. My work as a councillor spans some 37 years. First in Liverpool, where I was elected in 1986. I was a senior member of the council from 1997 to 2012. I moved to Cheltenham then, family reasons, and was elected to the council there in 2014. Being a councillor is an enormous privilege, I cannot tell you. It is a role very much set in the community and working with people. However, being so readily available can make one subject to unfortunate behaviours by constituents and others. In my own political career, I have experienced such behaviours. Liverpool and Cheltenham are two very different areas. Liverpool is a major city of some 500,000 people with a multinational community and indeed the oldest Chinese community in Europe. It is well known throughout the world, not least for its football clubs and its music. Cheltenham is a different kind of place. It has a population of about 120,000, as in Gloucestershire. And Gloucestershire is a rural county with a couple of towns, of which Cheltenham is one. And it's well known for its racing calendar and for its festivals, which bring lots of people into the town. In Liverpool, we had a period where councillors of a particular party were living in fear, threatened and coerced by that party into taking decisions some of them did not wish to take. If they didn't take those decisions, then they were bullied, barracked, and belittled at meetings, even having damaged their homes and cars splashed with paint. Councillors in other parties were also bullied and harassed, and women from all parties felt fearful. The controlling organisation within that party ruled because there was a majority of that party in the council, in spite of the fact that only 13 councillors out of 99 were members of that organisation within a party. That behaviour only ended when those responsible were barred from being councillors by the House of Lords. The harassment and bullying was all face-to-face, of course. In those days, cyberbullying wasn't known. Having lived through that period and seeing how it destroyed lives and the courage of those in the Labour and other parties who fought back, it was a period that taught me a great deal. In Cheltenham, for councillors, those newly elected or who have experience of threatening behaviour, a range of assistance is available. Training is done to make sure that councillors actually understand what help is available, how to tackle it and prevent physical abuse. If they come across abuse that is being aimed at one of their constituents, for example, somebody living in a home with an abuser, they can report that to us and we will ensure that that person has assistance, but also, if necessary, is given alternative housing. And as the person responsible for housing in Cheltenham, I can say that that actually happens. The English Local Government Association has produced advice available online, which is available to councils and councillors across England. The guidance offered is extremely important. However, that isn't all that we do. From physical abuse to online abuse, dealing with home security and different technologies, Cheltenham councillors have been invited to training sessions where this work is shared with them and help is available. Case studies illustrate the problems many councils and councillors face when communicating difficult decisions to residents. As in many areas of England, councillors in Cheltenham meet with their constituents. This is regularly done in my party and we're available to speak to residents on a one-to-one basis. Cheltenham Council has had to take really hard decisions recently, basically based on planning issues. And in the last months or so, when proposals have been to committees for decisions, particular people with vested interests have come to council meetings and threats, intimidation, and disruption have occurred. What we have had to do in Cheltenham when that's happened has meant that access to council meetings has changed. This was necessary because of the aggression that was shown to councillors at those meetings and at planning meetings and cabinet meetings and full council meetings, all of which are open and accessible to the public. In relation to meetings held at the council offices, members of the public who wish to attend now have to register their attendance before the meeting, and we now have security officers and occasionally police officers on duty at those meetings to ensure that councillors are safe and that difficult behaviour on behalf of some of those attending can be stopped. For all of us as local councillors, being accessible to our constituents is extremely important. And that's not just in person, but also for those residents who wish to contact online and by phone. In Cheltenham, every councillor is issued with a laptop or iPad that's registered to the local authority, which enables every individual councillor to have an email address related to the council system. However, many of us actually believe that our personal email address should be available, and we allow personal email addresses to be made available to our constituents. If my constituents wish to contact me, my personal telephone number is also available to them. And there have been occasions when I've had complaining messages left, which have even been threatening. But having spoken to the caller and explained the situation, most of the time things have improved. One of the difficulties we face is the level of misogyny in society, which has been increasing. And there are significant concerns, not just in Cheltenham, but across the country and beyond, in relation to how women are treated. The lack of women in politics doesn't help, and the lack of understanding of what politics is doesn't help either. In Cheltenham, we want to change that. Doing so isn't easy because there are, shall I call them, cells of organisations which are misogynistic and who will hurt people given the opportunity. In England, one such was National Action, now banned, and a member from there took the decision that he was going to murder a Liverpool area member of Parliament. Rosie Cooper was a member of Parliament, having been a Liverpool City Councillor for many, many years, and indeed we were close friends when I was a Liverpool City Councillor too. Purely by chance, a man who was a member of National Action was heard to say, after he'd had a few drinks, that he was going to kill her. Another person overheard what he said, and that person reported the matter because he didn't think an MP as good as Rosie Cooper should be murdered. what came out at the court trial after he was caught, and that took a long time, something Rosie had to live through for months, with some knowledge that she might be murdered at any time, was that he and members of the group that he was a member of, National Action, believed that women should not have the rights they had. They believed that anybody who was not white, not male, was not worth thinking about. Eventually, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, for Rosie, it was the end of her career. She couldn't carry on. She left Parliament after 17 years and was recognised by all parties as someone who had done not just a great job as an MP, but also a brave woman who had stood out against crime and misogyny. I was elected for a particular area known as a ward of Liverpool, where I stood for 26 years. In Cheltenham, I've been a councillor for a ward for the last 11 years. During those periods, what became obvious was the lack of women who wanted to go into politics. And so in Cheltenham, we've taken the decision to do something about it. In Cheltenham, we have 40 councillors, 15 of whom are women. The violence and intimidation against women and girls in the town centre at particular times of the year had to be tackled, because for girls, not feeling safe in the town centre in the afternoon or evening to come to meetings became very difficult. And so we tackled that. Whether I'll have time to go through what we did, I'm not sure. So let me continue with this first. We did a survey of young women called Your Voice. That was done through an organisation I set up called No Child Left Behind, which has been ongoing now for the last 5 years. This project was aimed to say to girls and to women and to boys, you can do this. And the survey that was done brought back their fears, their desire to see change, and what they wanted done about it. Political stories, in effect, in Cheltenham. We wanted them to believe that they could be involved in politics and that their voice would be heard. So women who did Your Voice are now invited to council meetings, invited to meet councillors, and to discuss with us their concerns and what they want to see happen. For boys and girls, and I do say boys as well, it's important that girls and women are treated equally. It's important too that what's happened in our country in recent years, particularly in relation to misogyny and violence against women, is actually stopped. And that has also been part of some issues in the police force. But the issue we face is, how the heck do we do this? It's easy to talk about, but much, much harder to do. So this is what we've looked at. The first is that government must ensure the safety of women and girls is not simply pushed to the rear because other things come first. The second is to ensure that girls living in our areas feel that they do have a voice, that they can speak, and by so doing, they will be listened to and action follow. By so doing, there is a role for them in politics. That parents and communities are informed about what's being done and why it's being done, that action needs to be taken through the police to ensure that misogyny in the police force, stupid police behaviour, and violence towards women does not become what it has threatened to become in recent times. Our schools are so important to this, and that's why we work with them to ensure that both boys and girls receive equality training in their education and know that one is not better than the other simply because they're a fella. And that kind of change to attitude makes an enormous difference. Obviously, I've spoken a great deal in relation to Cheltenham, but much of what's being done in Cheltenham could be done elsewhere. Ensuring our councils locally and regionally understand the importance of making sure girls and women feel safe when they endeavour to take part in politics. Ensuring our boys are educated on gender stereotypes and biases that are taught very young, so they no longer think that they are the big stuff and the girls are nothing. In conclusion, can I thank you for attention? I would just like to say that politics, if only for men, is meaningless. As more than 50% of the population are female, women must have a voice and a safe space in politics. Understanding the situation is extremely important, and I think that the presentations we've had have been terrific. Thank you. However, action following those and that understanding is even more important. Whether we're a rich area or a poor area, There are things that we can do to change the lives of our female councillors, girls and women, to make them safe, to give them a say in the future and the future of their community. And that's where we are in Cheltenham. And thank you for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Councillor Flo. I think that's a wonderful and insightful intervention, not only on the practical steps that councils can take to address this issue and councillors can take, but also the complexities of gender-based violence and violence against women. It's really a multifaceted nature. The multifaceted nature of GBV requires that we embrace a collaborative approach to address it effectively, but we also move from talk to action. I think that's what I'm hearing from your presentation. So thank you so much, Flo. In our next session, we will be moderated by Paddy Sianga-Natson. And here we will explore the strategies for fostering cooperation amongst various stakeholders to combat this pervasive issue. Welcome, Paddy.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, and thank you to the presentations that we've just received. I feel like we've taken a tour of the globe but also a tour in terms of looking at it from a city perspective, but also having listened very closely to what Councillor Flo shared in terms of what practical measures actually look like from a very practical point of view. And so thank you very much to the presenters. I just wanted to welcome again our panelists who are going to take part and take us through a dive of our interactive discussion this afternoon. Ruth from the United Cities and Local Governments World Secretariat, as well as Dr. Anne-Marie, and I have to be able to pronounce this correctly, Kagwesage, who is the chairperson of the Local Government Women's Network in Rwanda, and also the executive director of the Center for Rights, Education and Awareness, Wangechi Wachira. Thank you so much for finding time to be with us, and we will go straight into our panel. And maybe we've just come from a very local perspective with Councillor Flo, and so I wanted to bring in UCLG and Cecile, maybe even as we bring you up, knowing the importance that you have placed at the United Cities and local governments in terms of working and engaging with local and regional governments, that goes a little bit beyond their outreach, but also looking into their collaboration at that international level. Did you want to just walk us through a bit more where you see international organizations as well as some of the regional local government networks? Where do you see them playing really an important role when we talk about elevating the debate for collaborative approaches? Cecile?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for those questions and the invitation. I will share our presentation from United Cities and Local Governments with my colleague Benedetta Cosco. So I will just introduce a little bit this vision of what networks can do on this challenge in particular, and more generally for equality. And then she will also dive deeper into different experiences that we've had in terms of creating and expanding alliances, right? So multi-stakeholder, multi-level, etc. So from UCLG and as a way to also offer like a broader reflection on the role of networks in this area, we have let's say two ways of working on gender-based violence, and I want to come back to the intervention of Councillor Flo Lucas just before, because it was really a great way to introduce that, and thank you so much for sharing these experiences and anchoring us right in the experiences of locally elected women, which is like the basis from which we all need to start. So the way we work at UCLG around this is precisely as with women's like gender-based violence in politics and the way it affects women's political participation as the entry point, right? To then define and support equality agendas. So we work from the agenda around equality with those two priorities. One is women's political participation, and the other is the concrete agendas, local political agendas and local public services for equality, care, and solidarity. And we have this sort of thread that we use to weave those two and to enter in those two, that is really focusing on how inequalities and concretely violence against women and all other marginalized groups is really affecting both. So that is affecting the way we govern our democracy, etc., and also even the leadership models that we have, and political participation in concretely, and then also affects in a circular way what services, what policies, what planning we can do if we have like this sort of biased political participation to start with, right? So this is like really great to come here, and this is also linked to the study that Annelies presented, very great study from our section in Europe, and that we use beyond Europe actually in many ways. Then from UCLG concretely, what we do, and I want to also open this, like broaden a little bit the scope very quickly, and then we'll go to different concrete initiatives that we have. I want to broaden the scope with the link with the international community. So what we can do also concretely as networks, our role as this kind of organization. And I see it in two ways. The first is to facilitate movement building among locally elected women and feminist local leaders across continents, across very different contexts, across the urban-rural continuum, etc. And for this, we have what we call and what is recognized as the feminist municipal movement, which unites leaders, so women mayors, governors, councillors, and also not only women, but also other local leaders very committed to equality, again, from all continents and from all kinds of contexts. And they come together within this movement that we facilitate from UCLG and really work on different moments of the year on defining joint priorities, defining joint strategies, based on a common vision for equality and for democracy that very much focuses on, have as a priority this objective of ending violence against women and including in politics. So this is the movement. Then we also have from UCLG the network per se and the World Organization here based in Barcelona. We have two mechanisms. One of the is the UCLG Standing Committee on Gender Equality, which is our political leadership representing all regions and all sections of UCLG, and making this connection with our presidency and again, our broad political leadership. I won't come into details in that, but we have a very broad leadership in that regard. And so this is a standing committee that leads our strategies around gender equality. And then we also have the UCLG Women Facility, which connects our work in different dimensions, and mainly around partnerships, including with the international community, with the United Nations, but also with civil society and grassroots organizations. So really working on all those levels, layers, sectors, etc. So the facility has this axis around partnerships, then it has an axis of work around knowledge co-creation, with this circular idea of knowing, like learning and teaching each others and sharing experiences, and then a final one around services and programs. So this is the broad picture of how we work, and I think it also exemplifies broadly what local governments networks can bring to this discussion. And then finally, very quickly, just to mention that this year, the focus will be on the celebration of the 30-year anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action, which has objectives around violence against women. We will connect that obviously with the 2030 agenda and the review of SDG 5 that will be led at the high-level political forum in July for Beijing Plus 30. The main milestone, but not the only one, will be the Commission on the Status of Women in just like 10 days in March. And then we'll also include in this roadmap that we have for Beijing Plus 30 an engagement into different other milestones, such as the Financing for Development Conference, because we need to also bring equality and women's political participation and fighting against gender-based violence on those discussions around resources. And then we'll sort of end the year with the World Social Summit. We'll also prioritize this among the contributions from local governments. So that is like very quickly again the sort of the background, and then I would like to give the floor to Benedetta Cosco, who is part of our policy and statutory teams, and she's been working a lot with the Commission on the UCLG Commission on Social Inclusion and Human Rights, so she can also share a little bit more what we've been doing for the last years.
Thanks, Benedetta. You have 3.5 minutes.
3.5 minutes. Oh my God. I'll do my best. Thank you so much, Patty. Thank you so much, everyone. It's great to be here. And well, Cecile has been very comprehensive. So I hope that you are not too overwhelmed by information, but local governments do a lot of things. And I wanted just to give you like briefly a very concrete example of something that we've done about a project related to a project that that we have just finished. It was a project that started in 2021 and was launched by the Committee on Human Rights and Social Inclusion of UCLG and the Department of Seine-Saint-Denis in France, which has a very important local observatory on violence against women. And so this 4-year project basically was rooted in 2 fundamental assumptions that I think that we all share. The first one is that violence against women is one of the most widespread violation of human rights globally. And the second one is that local governments can play a pivotal role in combating violence through local public service provision and public policies. So how did we translate these broad assumptions into action? So first of all, we identified priorities. You know, we know, I mean, this is something that was raised by some participants in the previous panel. Violence against women is universal, but it takes different forms and priorities in different socioeconomic contexts. This is why, like, to address these nuances, we focused geographically on Africa and Latin America. And to do this, we organized 2 regional training sessions, one in Mexico City, in Mexico, and the other one in Banjul, in the Gambia. Each training brought about 10 local governments representatives, international experts, and CSO activists to share experience and policies, concerns, which explored specific thematic priorities which are specific to each region that we agreed upon with the participants of each training. For example, just to give you an idea, in Mexico, the training addressed topics such as intimate partner violence, femicide, violence in transportation and public spaces, while in Banjul, in the Gambia, the focus included forced marriage, female genital mutilation, and advocacy for legal reforms. So after identifying priorities, then we created tools, you know, because all these efforts, all these learning and exchange were further supported by the production of very practical tools, including reports, thematic fact sheet, an online MOOC that I will share with you right after the presentation. And the resources combined theoretical frameworks with very practical examples. Then, what did UCLG, what did the local networks, to conclude, do, you know, to elevate, as you were rightly pointing out, the voices of local governments? So we tried to leverage all the outcomes of this project to build global advocacy messages. First of all, we fed and informed the key reports of the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights Then, we've had also the UCLG advocacy at the Commission on the Status of Women and at the UN HLPF High-Level Political Forum through the mechanisms that Cecile just explained to you. And then we adopted a series of very powerful political declarations, one adopted in Mexico, one in the Gambia, and one adopted in Paris in November 2024. And all of these different steps combined with each other contributed, to elevate the debate and to build to scale up the efforts that local governments are already doing. I will maybe conclude just with the 5 takeaways from these projects very quickly. So then afterwards we'll go back to the questions if needed in the open floor. So what did this program and this project kind of like taught us, First of all, that the importance about the role of local governments and international networks of local governments. First of all, we need to rally partners and collaboratively identify thematic priorities which are tailored to each context. Afterwards, we need to promote exchange and learning to build shared narratives, which can be complemented, of course, by different tools and specific policy messages. Then we need to seek international visibility and support through international mechanisms, such as the one provided by UCLG, but also at the UN and international level, and at the same time, adopt frameworks and political declarations to encourage political commitments across diverse cities in diverse contexts. That was one of the main examples that we have. We will share different links afterwards, and we will be available, to further questions afterwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Benedicta, and thank you, Cecile, for sharing in those experiences. I think there's a lot of toolkits and information. Please feel free to share those in the chat. What we've also done in the chat is for us to share some of the questions that you have addressed for us in terms of international organizations and these regional local networks. What can we really get out from these spaces? So we're also asking participants to answer these questions from your space because we are indeed all coming or representing different regional local government networks. And now in the interest of time, just moving on, and we're going to zoom back onto Africa. And I wanted to invite Wangechi Wachira from the Center for Rights, Education and Awareness. And Wangechi, knowing that your organization indeed is working on gender equity, where you really are looking at, how do you coordinate prevention, response, how does accountability work when we talk about violence against women and girls at that national level, but also you're working at that county level in Kenya, in East Africa. And so Wangechi, would have been very interesting maybe for us to hear from you where you sort of see the civil society and the local government collaboration. And a number of things obviously come to mind there, where we're talking about strategies for partnerships, but also where we're talking about what is the enhancement behind it, and maybe just also giving us an example of where you've seen county government partnerships that are working. Wangechi, the floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me for this forum, and thank you. Hello, everyone. Very, very excited to be here. My name is Wangechi Wachira. I work for a women's rights organization that is based in Nairobi, but also working in different parts of the country. We have our footprints in different parts of the country, and our primary focus is restoring dignity for women who are survivors of gender-based violence. So in addition to providing the direct support, we also do a lot of what we call advocacy work. So working with the local government, which in Kenya, we have the county government. We have a devolved government, meaning we have county government and national government. And one of the key factors is that gender issues are national government. And again, as in this conversation, then we ask ourselves, that the county government are closer to the problem and closer to the people, and therefore they have a big responsibility to ensure that then because of their proximity, that they should be able to provide services to survivors of gender-based violence, but also dealing with how they can be able to prevent. So here we are looking at primary prevention, which is looking at stopping the violence from happening, but also looking at when violence does happen, how do we then prevent? And the local government or the county government then have a big responsibility. So some of the things that we have been able to be working with our local government is, one, to be able to adapt what we call the evidence-based models when it comes to prevention of violence against women and girls. And a practical example is the RESPECT model. And the RESPECT model is actually developed by the World Health Organization, WHO. And the RESPECT, of course, represents a number of interventions. And just to highlight some of the interventions in the RESPECT framework, one is looking at issues of the first are looking at issues of the relationship skills, is also looking at issues of empowerment of women. Here we are looking at issues of setting up microfinance, savings, is looking at also training with both men and women on how to deal with issues of gender. When it comes to the P in this, is looking at issues of or issues of poverty reduction. And I think the county government, for example, here in Kenya, has a big responsibility. Here we'll be looking at looking at practical things like cash transfer, in kind, looking at economic transfer to the people within the local government. They also have a big responsibility when it comes to service provision, which is the S. Here, the county government, for example, can be able to put hotlines whereby survivors can be able to call and be able to get support. They also have a responsibility to put in shelters, because safe spaces continues to be a big need when it comes to supporting survivors of gender-based violence. Here in our country, shelters continue to be a very big unmet need when it comes to supporting survivors of gender-based violence. Health is also a devolved function in the country, and we see because health is a direct support to survivors of gender-based violence. If the local government then can be able to put crisis center, one-stop center, so that the survivors can be able to access that service at the local level, it makes it a big service for survivors. When we walk into a health facility, then they can be able to get that service. When it comes to economic, what we call the environmental, which is the E in the RESPECT framework, here we are looking at infrastructure. I think the first speaker spoke about infrastructure, again, very, very critical, looking at how schools are safe for both boys and girls going to school, and ensuring that, there is lighting, for example, in the evening, to ensure that, again, in the pathways, is that there is no dark areas, they are well lit, and people can comfortably walk in the urban setup. When it comes to the final C in the RESPECT framework, before I go to T, is looking at issues of parenting interventions, which are very, very critical. How do parenting look at issues of reducing violence at a home, at a household level? And finally, is transformation that is looking at issues of attitude, change of social norms. And here we are looking at norms that have been carried over for a number of generations that continue to perpetuate violence. As an organization beyond the RESPECT framework, we have worked with the county government, and we have 47 county governments, which are local governments in the country. And what we have done, because gender is a national function, is to work with the county government. Practical example of what we have been able to do is to support county government to put in policies. Out of the 47 counties, we can be able to count 7 counties as an organization that we have been able to support to put in the framework when it comes to matters gender. And we work very closely with both the executive. We also worked with the legislative part of the government, so that then the policies can be put in place. But also very, very important is working very closely with the various caucuses within the county. We have women who are elected, and also the ones who come through the affirmative action. Those county caucuses make a very big difference when it comes to supporting policy, working with them closely from drafting to ensuring that they have messaging, also working with the women-led accountability groups at the community level, because we believe that at the end of the day, the grassroots organizations are also closer to the problem, and they also are closer to the solution. So working very close with them to ensuring that they can hold their leaders accountable when it comes to legislation, working very closely with them to ensure that there is budget allocation on matters of ensuring that there is reduction of violence, working very closely with them when they are developing the county integrated plans, which are developed annually, to ensure that as the plans are being developed, is there the voice, is there the agency, is there the decision making that is being done by the women? So working very closely to ensure that they are part and parcel of shaping how the county budget and the plans are being put in place. But also very, very important, because in our country, different parts of the country have various different forms of violence. So to what extent are the policies that are being put at the county level, are they responding to the violence that is happening at that level? You have some of the counties or local governments that they're dealing, for example, with female genital mutilation, and therefore ensuring others will be dealing with IPV, which is intimate partner violence. So really ensuring that as the policies are being developed, they're able to respond to the local issues at that level, so that then they can be able to plan for them. For us also, what we found very, very important is that at the local level, is that you have dedicated staff. Some of the counties where we have worked, they didn't have dedicated staff, and therefore working very closely with the governor, working very closely with the local women leaders, so that we have dedicated staff at the county level, whereby then there is somebody who can be held accountable when it comes to matters of gender. And then also what we have found very, very important working with the county government is the coordination. There are so many women's rights organizations working at the county level. So coordination brings in the technical working groups that then enables that in terms of planning, what are we going to prioritize within the calendar year? How do we plan for International Women's Day? How do we plan for 16 days of activism? But also when a case does happen, that all these stakeholders are coming together and they're able to respond to the immediate needs of women and girls at the local level, and then be able to find the solutions in that at the county level. I think for us also what we have found strength is in terms of coordination. The counties are very big, and therefore ensuring that the county is divided in a way that every part of the county, there is an organization or working very closely with the county government, that the services are closer to the people, even when it comes to services being provided, that working around the county, one can be able then to get services very, very closely to where the people are. I think also for us, what has also been a very big plus is to be able to work with the allies at the county assembly. And when I talk about allies here, we are looking, one, to be able to work very closely with men who are champions at the county level, who then are able to advocate for budget allocation, because the county get only 40% of the national government. And therefore, when those resources are taken to the county level, you also need to have champions then who are able to say some of these resources need to go to issues that affect women and girls. So working very closely, for example, with the budget committee has also been a big plus for us as an organization, to see that when the budgets are being allocated at the county level, then they reflect the issue, the support for women and girls. I mentioned about working with the Women Caucus. We have an affirmative action provision, and very, very closely working with that caucus to ensure that they are constantly pushing for issues that affect women and girls at the county level. For us has been very, very critical. I must also say that there is a big role for the private sector. And why I say private sector is, for example, a shelter need to be constructed. The county government would give land, but in terms of brick and mortar, they might not have resources. So working very closely with the private sector for construction. working very closely with the private sector, for example, for the toll-free line, that they can be able to offer that toll-free line so that then people can be able to call and be able to get services. When on the other end, the county government then will be able to provide staff who can be able to be at the front line to be able to respond to all calls that come and give that kind of service. Working very closely with the grassroots organization. I want to emphasize this more because most of them are rooted within the community, and therefore meaning they already know who is likely to be going through violence, who was violated even last night. So working very closely with the grassroots organization because they are able to refer, but also they're able to provide services where the county government is not providing those services. And practical example of services are, for example, providing legal service, providing psychosocial support, but also ensuring that there is an economic empowerment program that then is focusing on healing and restoring dignity for survivors of gender-based violence. I want to stop there. I could go on and on, but I see time is not on end. Thank you.
Wangeshi, thank you so much. So just giving us, what's that broader picture and what it looks like. And I really like the last point you've emphasized on us bringing it back again to the grassroots, and whether we're talking about financing, resources, but also the connection. And indeed the data, isn't it? The data that comes out from the grassroots that should really be feeding through all the way to conversations with the budget committee, but all the way into other aspects of policy as well, to make sure that it responds to these very needs. So really appreciate your sharing from a Kenyan perspective. And now, last but not the least, want to call on Dr. Anne-Marie Kagwesage, who is the chairperson of the Local Government Women's Network in Rwanda. And just, if you could just share from your wisdom and the extensive work that you're doing in Rwanda, how do you see women's networks, such as the one that you're leading, how do they work with local government in order to address GBV? Dr. Anne-Marie?
Thank you so much. And it's my pleasure to be part of this community of network, and also very important discussions that have taken place. It's really very interesting, and I appreciate. And when I give in my contribution, I'm going to focus more on the strategies that the local women network in Rwanda use to support or to work with the local government to reduce gender-based violence. I would start by saying that the local government women network in Rwanda plays an advisory role, and it's also part of affiliated to the local government, because all the women who make up the network are from the local government business, from the governors, the district mayors, the vice mayors, the district council chairpersons, up to the village leaders. So it's a comprehensive network that oversees what happens at local levels in a comprehensive way. So as the previous presenters said, even in Rwanda, we have examples and instances of gender-based violence, which each and everyone tries to contribute to reducing, because we believe that, as we plan to make strides in the development, we cannot really develop at the pace we want if there are people who are still discriminated, if there are people who still experience violence. So different government structures put their efforts together to really make sure that we reduce gender-based violence to the minimum. So I would start by saying that there are already existing structures to address gender-based violence. In the past, there was no kind of institutional support, but I would say that at least up to the moment, we've got what we call Isange One-Stop Center, which are structures that are close to the people. In each and every district hospital, we've got Isange One-Stop Center, and the centers operate 24 hours and 7 days. So if anybody has got issues related to gender-based violence, so support is available at any time. Then I would also say that the government has put in place the concept of safe shelter for gender-based victims. And this means that whenever someone has got issues related to gender-based violence, then they can be sheltered in a safe space with a safe environment. And this also expands into protective options for victims and those at risk. So it doesn't need to wait until the victim is there, but even when you feel you are at risk to experience gender-based violence, then you get the support in terms of safe shelter. Then if I focus more on the role of the local government women network, I would say that basically we play an advisory role. I say that before, but we also focus more on providing training and capacity building programs to equip women with the necessary skills to effectively participate in the local governance. We also collaborate with the local authorities at different levels and also within different structures to develop and enforce policies that protect women and girls from violence. Again, we also partner with organizations, different organizations, NGOs, and civil societies to provide support services such as counseling and also legal assistance to gender-based violence victims. I would say that the local government women network is uniquely positioned to advocate for gender responsive policies and also programs at local levels. Why do I say that we are uniquely positioned to respond to that? Because we are represented at all levels of decision making. I told you from the village level up to the top level, I would say up to the central government. So we ensure that gender responsive policies are centered on empowerment, and also they are effectively implemented, and they address the real needs of women in the community at all levels, from the village level to the province level. We sit in committees. Those women that make up the network sit up in committees that take decisions and make policies. So we make sure that our voice is heard to really reduce gender-based violence to the minimum. Then the network also supports initiatives that engage both men and women in addressing gender-based programs. For example, we have the concept of couples for healthy relationships, and they educate couples on gender-based violence, power dynamics, and issues related to conflict resolutions. And with this, the aim is to foster The aim is to foster healthier family environment and by then reducing violence. So we believe that reducing gender-based violence would not simply concentrate on females, but having a comprehensive way of, having women and men together would yield more positive results. So by having members within the local government structures, the local government women network can directly advocate for the integration of gender perspectives into local development plans. And I would say that specifically at different levels, the members of the councils have take decisions on budgeting, and we also have to make sure that the gender budget statement is used to promote gender equality and reduce gender inequalities and some violence that might be related. And this is an obligation for all the women who sit on the council committees to make sure that that budget line is reflected, included, and utilized accordingly. Then I would also say that many of the strategies that the local government women network rely on are results oriented, especially in terms of empowerment and also making sure that we concentrate on the causes, on reducing the causes of gender-based violence instead of just, punishing the perpetrators. So number one, we concentrate more on economic empowerment through different projects involving women in projects and also making sure they have got access to finance. And they have different associations. In our context, we call it Ikimina, and here I try to use it as table banking, where they loan each other money and they also contribute to developing their homes themselves and also starting some businesses. And in a way, if they become self-reliant like that, that reduces in a way issues related to gender-based violence. So access to finance opportunities and initiatives that reduce dependency, reduce violence. And again, we have also found that issues related to, like women belonging to different cooperatives, different cooperatives where they learn and support one another is also helpful. And this also links to aspects related to peer coaching, peer support, and also peer mentoring. And sometimes we also extend beyond the peer-to-peer to also call upon seasoned women in different high positions to come and talk to others, in the network, share experience, because, each one has got issues in their careers. All of us have got problems in our homes, but finding ways and space to discuss that also shows solidarity and collaboration, and to also get peer advice to advance and also support others. So support mechanisms in place. And in addition to the support mechanisms, we also concentrate more on sharing information and raising awareness. And all that is combined to elevating the young girls and young people to also know that to be aware of the existence of gender-based violence, and also to devise mechanisms to reduce or to eradicate altogether. So we work with the students in the universities. They know what happens in their homes. They are the future leaders. We work with them to, first of all, interest them to be ready to work in the local government, but also to know the realities out there that they will be required to address. So by working with the young girls, they participate into transformative leadership, local governance, and also the change of attitudes. Change of attitudes matters. And by then, we believe that we are also training the next generation of transformative leaders who will also lead people for this society that is violence free, hopefully. And again, I would say that we reach out to rural women as well. And I would say that the journey continues. And I appreciate this platform where we are learning together. And hopefully, the learnings from this session will also contribute to new initiatives as we strive to reduce the gender-based violence in our societies so that we all prosper together. So, well, I would say a lot, but let me stop here for now. Thank you very much. It was a great learning
Thank you.
opportunity. Bye-bye.
Dr. Anne-Marie, thank you so much for these insights where you've taken us all the way from very practical measures like the one-stop center, but also talking again, bringing back the conversation to the grassroots and the importance of the proximity that the local governments have to the grassroots and why that is important. And so knowing that we're running out of time, so with sincere apologies, we will be stopping in a moment. We just thought what would be interesting for me is to take a bit of a wrap up, but it's really difficult. I have a one-pager, you can imagine, from all the very rich presentations, so I will not be able to cover it, but a few things stand out. It was really interesting to sort of start from this sense of where we were saying, how do we bring down this genocide, this femicide rates that we continue to see. And then also issues around why are girls not safe? How do we change social norms that continue to perpetrate, and for us to see increasing levels in gender-based violence and violence towards women. But then also to go into the depths of it and see that indeed, no matter how much progress seems to have been made with different tools, and Michelle said something around, we're actually not short of legislative frameworks, so we're never short of global inspiration, neither are we short, as we heard from UCLG also, we're not short of regional, if you like, inspiration, and listening to Dr. Anne-Marie and also to the examples that we have listened from in Kenya, we are not short of even national inspiration. But then still, why do we continue to see prevailing numbers when we see the rates in the intimate spaces, particularly, which seem to be far out of the reach of the local government and of the city? But it's been very interesting to listen to the solutions, and I thought we should lean into some of these solutions. And from my reading and from my understanding of the different and rich discussion that we have had today, we really stem off from the politics. And the politics is where we see not just the goodwill, but also where we see the accountability. And it was really interesting to continue to emphasize the fact that we need much more women in leadership, we need much more women in political leadership, but also in the local administrative leadership. But how do we ensure also that as they enter into these spaces, and we heard from Councillor Flo, that as they enter into the spaces, that they don't face bullying and harassment. And also to see some of the troubling trends that we see from a digital perspective. But then very interesting to see what I would call sort of influencers from the local government network in Rwanda that gives you this space where a lot of these things could be shared and a lot of these things could cascade, because you've got this comprehensive network of leaders of women all the way to the village level, and that take you also with the connection with the central, but then also with the political space. So that was particularly interesting. We zoomed in a lot also to talk about financing and resources. and interesting examples of how could we continue to work with budget committee, for instance, as we heard from Kenya. The engagement with private sector was very, very important as well in sort of these public-private civil society, or even to one extent grassroots partnerships. And there was really an emphasis of not forgetting the grassroots when we talk about referral, when we talk about service provision, but also when we talk about the empowerment that we look for. A lot of questions I think we've been left around, do cities have the autonomy and where is the space for them to breathe? But the examples from South Africa that talked about, you know, the city engagement in prevention, in education and response were very interesting. Also listening into Eco Brussels initiative that we heard from Anili, that was really also interesting. But also when we went to the southeast part of Europe, where Nalas was showing us not only from a data perspective, but from a network perspective, you could really see cities sort of taking on sometimes what is not devolved autonomy to them, but taking up indeed a lot of initiatives. And the examples out of Kenya were equally interesting. Maybe to conclude a few more elements, I think that tools were really expanded on, and thank you for our panelists for sharing and also responding to some of the questions that were in the chat that referred to policy, to practice and tools. And so we're not short of tools, and so we encourage those of you who are working in these spaces to investigate these tools that have been shared. We spent some time on education from all our panelists. There was a lot about what about the change in attitude? What about this education on gender stereotypes for boys and girls? So how do we start early? And I think all speakers were able to speak about this. I particularly found very interesting the focus on the couple and family, which brings back the trend that kicked us off, and talking about the socializing on power dynamics that we heard from the network in Rwanda. Really interesting for us. Technology, we cannot leave a space today talking about technology, but we saw technology in various aspects, whether it was hotline and websites that have been offered, but also the challenges to addressing this, but also where technology has been used for training and communication, where technology has also, if you like, been used in a contrary way. And so that was also very interesting for us to see. But then also when we came to talk about infrastructure, which we spent quite some time on, a lot of different examples, and thank you so much for sharing these from one-stop center carriages, but also talking about the pink carriages. It made me think that I live in Germany, and here in Europe, we have silence zones on a train, and you even have women parking. And why would a safe zone for women on trains and public transportation not be a very good idea if we already have some similar initiatives? But also, I think infrastructure examples that touched on not just on the initiative, but it also touched quite a bit on where we see staff that are dedicated to supporting GBV implementation in terms of the policies at that county level, at that local level, and also where we see their relations. Thank you so much to the many panelists who spoke to us. I know we touched on many aspects, very interesting, Councillor Flo. Also, when you talked about the rule of law, I found the case very intriguing of how you really move into enforcement. And I think that's important for us, that we see when policies have been put in place, and then you see this end of enforcement where it says if we do not abide by certain rules and if we don't play by the right game, even in the political space, cases could be taken up. So it was very interesting to see the judiciary play a very critical role in ensuring safety of women in the political space. But then also talking about some of this capacity and the networks, and whether it's from an advisory role perspective or an advocative role perspective that we heard, all really trying to talk about how can we effectively support participation of women in local government. And also all these other examples that came in from the women's platforms that we heard about from Nalas, and also UCLG's feminist municipal movement, and many other examples, including engaging women caucuses in Kenya, and looking also at other aspects to sustain women in their various positions, to continue to elevate the debate. So what is important for us looking forward before we get to the top of the hour is that the conversation continues in this space with the LPSA. And so maybe to start off, that if you're not a member of the Local Public Sector Alliance, I think links have been shared in the chat. Please do join. And from that website and through your sign up to the newsletter, you will be able to see upcoming events and upcoming meetings. Our next meeting is taking place in August. And so we take a dive and we move from gender-based violence, which is very important. We don't just move from it. So we will have some other announcements coming along in how we utilize this information. But also what we want to do in the August meeting is to focus to the sub-national finance part. There was a lot of talk about it today in how sub-finance from a gender responsive level is really, really critical and important for us to see most of what we see as practices come to life and are sustained. And the November meeting, we're looking forward to then moving that conversation to advancing women's career in local government administration. So something that, again, we have touched on a lot today. And why are we sharing this information? It's only March, it's only February, because we're looking to you as the members to share maybe references, or you yourself are working around, gender responsive subnational finance or local government administration. We would like to have some speakers. We would like to call upon speakers to come and share with us from your varied experience so that we can make this as engaging as possible for all the members. To our panelists today, thank you so much. And we will be sharing this recording and we will close for today. Thank you to all the participants for staying with us until, even though we're a little bit over time for today. Jackie, thank you. And thank you again to all the co-chairs for having supported us and being here with us today.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you soon.